Good evening. My name is Keisha Rogers, and I want to welcome you to tonight's LaRouche PAC Introduction to LaRouche PAC discussion. And we have these meetings 3 times a week. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, this call is to give you a sense of who our founder, Lyndon LaRouche, a little bit more about what we as LaRouche PAC represent, and also give you a sense of our political fight and mission. Now, in order to participate in these discussions, for those who may be listening on YouTube and will follow after, we only produce the opening remarks of the discussion for public discussion. And if you'd like to join in the live dialogue and participate with us, then I would encourage you, and I will put the link in shortly in the chat, and we'll have that link available on the YouTube as well, to sign up with LaRouche PAC, become a part of our activities. And as I said, we have a call every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday, and you can find out more about those calls at our action page on LaRouchePAC.com. So tonight, you see a couple of faces here. I'm going to be joined by 2 of my colleagues, Brian Lance here in Texas with me, and also Ben Deniston. And the theme of tonight's discussion, if you weren't able to get the email, is going to be the question of, is economics about money or mastering the laws of the universe? And that's an appropriate question given some of the operations and in terms of how people have been conditioned to think about economy. And so we're going to discuss that. And let me just say that last week there were some very powerful and magnificent things that happened throughout our solar system. And there were also some developments in terms of our understanding of what happens when we don't put a focus on the idea of mankind taking control and dominion over the solar system, the idea of the creative powers of mankind, when we allow for, as some people might call it, for Mother Nature to run rampant and us to start cursing out Mother Nature instead of thinking about why is it that we have had failed policies scientifically and economically? Why has the green agenda of the Green New Deal, Malthusian environmentalism held the progress of mankind back? And not only that, why has on the opposite side, you've seen the ideologies of free market economics? And this is what we experienced here in Texas last week, just as a prime example of what happens when your policies are corrupt, should we say, for lack of better words here. And you have, what this has been the fight of Lyndon LaRouche and our political action committee for many decades, to expose the fraud of the Malthusian, and not just the fraud, but the criminality, the criminal negligence of the green policy and of the deregulation policy of free market economics. And so I want people, if you have not, there's a couple of things before we get into our discussion that I want to point out to you in our political fight that's extremely important. One is, first of all, for those who are not familiar with Lyndon LaRouche and the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I want to introduce you to our political efforts by, first of all, encouraging that you go to our website, LaRouchePAC.com. And when you go to that website, you will find the LaRouche PAC mission statement. And I just wanted to give people the introduction to that mission statement, so you will have no misunderstanding as to the fight that we are about and what we represent. And in that statement, it starts off by talking about the fact that in 8 presidential campaigns ranging from 1960 1976 to 2004, Lyndon LaRouche challenged the imperial elites of the world by mobilizing the forgotten men and women of America to understand and act on his revolutionary policies to free the nation and the world from the grip of the modern British Empire and to reverse the ravages of decades of post-industrial, neo-Malthusian, and neo-colonial criminality. So challenged were the global elites by LaRouche's ideas and his political organizing that he was framed up and thrown in prison for 5 years, from 89 to 94, by the very same intelligence and judicial networks that have waged a coup against Donald Trump, a coup which denied him his duly elected second term. And this gets to the point of why we've been on the front lines fighting against the oligarchy and the coup against our republic, not just against the president, Donald Trump, but also against the very concept of our constitutional republic. And so in that fight, people may have noticed, and I would encourage you to sign the petition that we are continuing to wage the fight to defend our republic, to defend President Trump, which we still call him the legitimate president. It's called, if you have not seen it, we'll post it in the chat. It's called Hands Off Trump, Shut Down Pelosi's 9/11 Charade. And so far the petition has over 1,400 signatures in the last few days. We want to escalate that campaign. And as a part of exposing, the petition calls for investigating the real perpetrators behind the January 6th events at the Capitol. So you can learn more about that and other material and details exposing the whole fraud behind that operation and why the American people, 75 million people that voted for Donald Trump and his supporters, were not the cause of the attacks of January 6th. And we're calling for more investigation into this. So I wanted to give that overview firsthand before we get into the discussion, because that is what's holding us back. The fact that we've had to deal with over 4.5 years plus of targeting against the American people. Why we were not prepared when people were left freezing. And this is not the first time. From Hurricane Harvey to Hurricane Rita to Sandy to so many other disasters that left people in devastating conditions because they had not learned about the scientific and economic rigor of Lyndon LaRouche and why we could have prevented this with the type of science driver national mission orientation to build up our national infrastructure grid. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And so I want people to think about, as we were facing that crisis, how it is that we mobilized to send a rover and a mission to Mars with a rigor and a uniting of the greatest scientific minds, that NASA accomplished the goal that we now have perseverance on Mars. And this didn't just happen with the snap of the finger. It happened because you had people come together to solve a problem and to actually address the real scientific commitments of our nation. And we have to learn how to do that again. So let me go ahead and bring Ben into the discussion here, because I think Ben's going to give us a sense of why LaRouche has really focused on the question of what is the purpose of the mind of man in our solar system? How do we come to understand the solutions to address the economic crisis we confront? So go ahead, Ben, how are you?
Doing good, Keisha. Glad to be on with you guys. Thanks for the introduction. So I'll say throw out a number of things. Hopefully it'll be a little bit provocative, and then I know Brian's got some good material to add to the discussion, and then we can open it up for the Q&A, and I definitely look forward to engaging with people. So I'm going to err towards brevity in this opening remarks, and if I miss anything or people have any questions, let's just have at it when we get into the Q&A. But Keisha, I really like your reference to mastering the laws of the universe. I mean, that is our mission. That is our mission as a species. That is our mission as mankind, and that's definitely our mission as LaRouche PAC. And it was Lyndon LaRouche's mission. And, if people, I'm sure there's a nice variety of people on this call. Some people have been probably following Lyndon LaRouche and LaRouche PAC for many years. Some people might be newer to our organization and our movement. And so I think it's important just to emphasize Mr. LaRouche was a leading thinker, a leading scientist, as well as a statesman. And in a certain sense, from the same kind of unified perspective, his idea with politics, with statecraft, all the work he did in the political theater was about advancing mankind. But there's a scientific question involved. What is mankind? What is human society that you're trying to advance? What does it mean to advance mankind, right? You have the Biden administration. You have goofballs like John Kerry going around saying we now have 9 years left to save the planet based on some cult-like belief in mankind's carbon sins destroying the world. And they're presenting that as the mission we must all gather around, a completely insane view. So, they're part of politics, real politics, in the most fundamental and deepest sense, involves these key scientific questions. What is mankind? What's mankind's nature? What's the nature of the universe? What is the goals for human society to progress? Those become scientific questions and philosophical questions. And any real political thinkers, like Mr. LaRouche, like many of our founding fathers, like many of the great thinkers that inspired our founding fathers and inspired the people that fought to found this country and found a Republican government, saw the connections between those issues. And that's the level at which we need to wage this fight if we really want to be victorious on a deeper historical level. And Mr. LaRouche's work is, an amazing reference point for how to wage that fight and where we want to go. So from that standpoint, we thought it would be fun just to throw out some of these issues of climate change, and mankind's response to that. And what do we need to do? Partly in response to the situation that occurred in Texas, but then, more broadly with the reemergence of this man-made climate change cult that's, going to rally around the Biden administration and try and push their crazy agenda once again, I'm sure. So, the facts, the bottom line, the science is that carbon dioxide is not a major determining factor for the Earth's climate. And human emissions contributions to that is not something that we should be concerned about, especially to the degree of dismantling modern society for some insane gimmicks of solar power and wind and whatnot. And the best evidence we have for the impact of carbon dioxide on the planet that we can actually measure, demonstrate scientifically, is the greening of the planet, if anything. The plant life, especially in areas of low water availability, desert regions bordering on deserts, you're actually seeing a consistent greening of the planet, increased plant life, increased plant biomass produced year after year after year, because higher levels of CO2 not only improve plant life, but they especially improve plant life when water use is limited. So the claims that CO2 is causing global warming, But then if there's not warming, they call it climate change, because then if they just can point to any quasi-extreme weather, they can say that's climate change, and therefore that's your fault because you're driving your car. That's all modeling. It's a theory. It's a theory that was proposed. They came up with a bunch of wildly complex models to claim what's going to happen according to their assumptions. Those models are wrong every time. Whenever you run them and test them against reality, they don't show, but all they do is come back and say, well, now we have these new models, and these new models are going to say it's actually going to be worse. So forget what we said 10 years ago. Now you have 9 years left, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a big fraud. Climate change is real. We're just not the ones driving it. And the big question we should be concerned about is returning to a scientific perspective. How do we continue to master the laws of the universe and improve society based on our understanding of the laws of the universe to prevent problems that we would inevitably face due to the natural variations in the Earth's climate and in the larger systems in which the Earth participates. So, a lot can be said on this. I think it's fun just to take the broadest perspective. What do we know is the biggest driver of climate change? If you take a big picture view, look at the history of the Earth. If you take the past billion years on Earth, right, the time period in which encapsulates the development of complex life throughout the planet, most of the evolutionary development of life that you're familiar with occurred during the last 500 million years. The biggest driver of climate change, the biggest variations in climate, seem to correspond to the Earth's relation to our galaxy, to our galactic system. You've had periods for tens of millions of years in which you had no glaciation at all. There was no ice caps. In fact, most of the time over this period, there were no ice caps. You didn't have an ice cap over Antarctica. You didn't have permanent glaciation in the Northern Hemisphere. That just didn't exist. Sometimes they call these hothouse Earth periods, although I don't know if that's the best term. And then you have periods when you do have glaciation. We're in a period of glaciation now on this largest cycle, corresponding to our relation to the galaxy. Subsumed within that, you have what are called the Milankovitch cycles, where variations in the Earth's orbit, the inclination, the tilt of the Earth, how the way the orbit changes as the Earth moves around the sun, how elliptical it is, what the orientation of the ellipse of the orbit is relative to the tilt of the Earth. These factors create what we tend to call the periods between ice ages and interglacials. So during these long periods of tens of millions of years of glaciation existing at all, you have these subsumed cycles relating to our solar system and the organization of our solar system and our Earth's orbit within the solar system of ice ages and interglacials. So when you hear reference to the fact that we emerged out of the ice age 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, that's part of these Milankovitch cycles. So instead of talking about cycles on millions and tens of millions of years of these huge changes, you have subsumed intensities of glaciation varying corresponding to the solar system. And then within that, you have shorter term variations due to the activity of the sun. And the sun goes through hundreds of years long cycles. And within that, causing what sometimes get referred to as mini ice ages, so smaller level variations. And then within that, you have the 11-year solar cycle and so on. So it's kind of a fascinating nesting of the largest, most strongly influential system of the galaxy. Within that, you have the solar system with the Earth's orbital relation. Within that, you have the sun itself. So you have this kind of fascinating nesting of astronomical phenomenon which determine the Earth's climate. And this is still a new science, really, and we're still learning a lot about this. But the point is, going back to the opening question of mankind mastering the laws of the universe and what is the nature of mankind, Well, we can do that. We can understand that. No animal can understand that. You know, over this time period, animals have come and gone. Um, these kinds of climate variations, natural variations, galactic influences have led to extinctions, evolutionary development of new species. So this natural process has been part of the development of life, but mankind is unique because we can understand this and we can change our society through the development of infrastructure, through the development of economies and more advanced economies to deal with these things. And that's our mission. That's what we do as mankind. We constantly improve ourselves. We don't shut down advanced technology like Al Gore and John Kerry and Biden and these crazy people are talking about for windmills and some crappy solar panels, right? We go the other direction. We go to more higher forms of energy density, higher forms of energy flux density, nuclear power, fusion power, coal, natural gas, petroleum. It's fine. You know, let's use it while we have the infrastructure to use it. But that's not going to be the primary energy source moving into the future. The primary energy source is going to be nuclear, and it's going to be increasingly fusion power. So that's what we should be making a major crash program to develop. And with that level of an economy and a well-regulated economy, which I think Brian's going to get into, with sane policies, you can handle these kinds of variations, right? Natural climate change that we just have to deal with. You know, there's concerns that the sun might be going into a relatively dormant period in terms of these cycles on the scales of hundreds of years. Not that it would be dormant for 100 years, but periods of lower solar activity that come on those kinds of time scales. Is that going to happen? We don't know. If it does happen, global cooling would probably be far more impactful and catastrophic on society than global warming. If you actually look into it, the effects on how that would shift where certain crops could be grown, places that are major producers of crops that millions and millions of people depend upon might no longer be able to grow those crops through cooling effects. So if we really want to prepare for climate change and deal with real climate change, we need to advance the economy. We need to develop better infrastructure, better science, better biological sciences. And that should be our mission, you know, not whipping ourselves on the back for sinning from emitting carbon, which itself is a vital part of the entire biospheric system. And every car that drives by, you know, there is pollution, which is different than carbon emissions. You know, and a lot of the regulations have reduced the amount of actual pollution that comes out of much of the energy infrastructure, at least in advanced places like the United States. So that, you know, that's an issue to deal with. But the actual carbon emissions, you know, the plants are cheering it. The trees are calling for it. They love it. You know, there's been periods historically, millions of years ago, when the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere were far higher than they are now. And the biosphere got along fine. I'm sure the plants were very happy with that. We're actually on a historically relatively low part of carbon, low levels of carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. So these are just, you know, these are some issues that are definitely coming up, are going to continue to come up, and we have to lead the fight against policies that would be catastrophic for the US economy and catastrophic for the global economy. If we go with the Paris Climate Accord, which Biden already brought us back into, it's one of the first things he did when he came in. If we go with this wind, solar, low carbon fraud, you know, that's going to destroy the US economy. That's going to destroy living standards and populations around the world. And the alternative is what we're laying out here: real science, understanding real climate change, and most importantly, how we advance as society. So I'm just going to leave my thoughts to open there. I think Brian's got some good stuff to come in, and then we can, you know, take up more details or additional thoughts in some of the Q&A.
Okay, Ben, Keisha, and everyone gathered here for the Zoom call. And again, I want to emphasize, if you're watching this being replayed on YouTube or on the LaRouche PAC website. When it's replayed, only this first part with these short presentations will be available there. And if you want to join LaRouche PAC for the discussions, those full question and answer discussions are available live, and you sign up on LaRouche PAC, larouchepac.com. You can sign up there and you'll get notices. As Keisha mentioned, there's 3 shows a week, and we encourage you to do that. And of course, you can share that with your friends and so forth. This is an organizing process. Let me just start by saying President Trump, of course, was committed to nuclear energy and helped drive himself and with the Department of Energy and so forth, the development of modular nuclear reactors like NuScale and so forth. We've discussed that before. And likewise was committed to rebuilding the US as a manufacturing superpower, which he still is, from the standpoint of his office that he's created of the former president of the United States. He's still committed to mobilizing the broader institution of the presidency for the American people and for its future. So, the discussion we're having here tonight is in this context of a battle going on in which we have 75 million plus people, voters in this country that are committed to what Trump outlined to make America great again. And we're filling out here aspects of the economic program, and we're organizing the base of the American people to support an active participation of the American people to utilize President Trump and his efforts to crush really what is a green fascist, and Trump has recently, you may know, used the term green fascism, fascist effort around the avatar named Biden in the White House and his collective and their agenda, the so-called Great Reset. So we just got a lesson in Texas. And again, I'll keep my remarks very short. I'm just going to throw out some key features of it. Some have called it the Texas windmill massacre. That's certainly appropriate for starters. Yeah, windmills were a big part of this. You know, from Valentine's Day for a whole week, this state was just torn apart, shut down. 4.5 million households and businesses without power. Then millions of people without water as well. No access to water. That's still going on, in fact. The consequences of this broken pumping stations and pipes and on and on and on. And definitely this was, this was a solar vortex that came down south. But here in Houston, we're quite a ways south near the Gulf. This happened in 1989. This is not some, unforeseen, impossible event. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. But this shut down the state. The entire electrical power grid run by an agency called ERCOT collapsed. The Energy Reliability Council of Texas. Energy reliability is in the name, but not in the actions of this entity. This collapse was the direct result of the deregulation of the state's energy system, which occurred in 1999. Many of you will remember Enron, the company, the notorious Enron Corporation, Ken Lay, Schelling, and others, and the participation and promotion of that by Governor of Texas, George W. Bush, who fully supported this deregulation policy that took down the existing central utility companies, that owned the power producing stations, owned the delivery lines, and delivered it to the households. Took that down, that central system, which was regulated by the state, and said, oh, we're going to deregulate. Why? Because this is going to create market efficiencies, i.e. profits. And therefore, and it will, as Governor George W. Bush stated, it will lower energy costs. Well, first of all, it did not lower energy costs. Texas, a recent review of the Energy Information Agency, that's U.S. government outfit. A review of their figures shows that Texans paid $28 billion more for energy in the last 2 decades than the average cost in the United States. And in fact, paid significantly more than the few still regulated utility companies that exist in Texas, such as San Antonio and Austin. So there's a very clear comparison. It ran up energy prices. But more importantly, of course, essentially is the entire system collapsed. It didn't function. So first of all, the windmills. The windmills, a week before Valentine's Day, thereabouts, were providing 42% of the electricity to the grid, to the ERCOT grid, which covers almost 90% of Texas. One centralized independent grid. 42% of that was provided by wind power. All right, that dropped to 8% as the storm came barreling in. That's just a fact. ERCOT was buying from these wind stations. And just so you know, these wind stations are not owned by, you know, some little boy in Holland who sticks his finger in the dike and that kind of thing. These are major, huge international outfits. Algonquin Power and Utilities of Canada, Redcoat. It's an outfit out of England. You know, red coats versus blue coats, red coats. The really big. I'm trying to find the name of it here. Here it's like REW, I believe. It's a huge electrical company out of Germany. These are the kinds of companies that built and own and operate these windmills in West Texas. But anyway, so these windmills shut down to 8%, providing 8% of the power as the storm came barreling in. And of course, they knew what was going to happen. They froze up. They couldn't operate. So suddenly, a huge percentage of what was providing electricity to the state was suddenly not available. And that had cascading effects just by itself, but there's other features of this. Secondly, I want to just go back briefly to pick up on something that Ben was developing or referenced. Economic modeling, climate modeling, just a lot of crap. Well, economic modeling, that's how ERCOT runs this system. Centralized manages 680 power stations around the state, independently owned, who are competing to sell power to the state. This is supposed to create these market efficiencies, you know? That's what they were talking about. All right, well, this is done with something very similar to the Kantorovich-Koopmans linear economic model that was utilized in the Soviet Union to organize productive forces across the Soviet Union, and which collapsed in the great grain harvest disaster of some decades ago. Kantorovich won the Nobel Prize along with Koopmans out of, I believe he's out of Harvard. And Kantorovich pointed out, well, you couldn't blame him for this because he said, you know, hey, you can't control the weather. I'm a physicist. I don't control the weather. Well, you know, this is exactly what was instituted here. This has been pointed out by an economist at the University of Houston who presented this in the pages of the Houston Chronicle in 2013. So this is not unknown that here you have at ERCOT a computerized control room, you know, you can imagine system, looks like the Nautilus or something out of, you know, some science fiction movie or something. Anyway, making millions of calculations on where to buy energy, where it's cheaper to transport it to, millions of calculations, you know, per minute, or it may perhaps even a second. But with any mathematical model is necessarily incomplete. There's holes in it. The most basic one here is they couldn't, you can't see in the model what would create the current circumstances that would provide the amount of energy that you need to run the state. Well, it turned out once the power stations started going out in West Texas, the windmills, and they started ramping up the natural gas plants, which increased 400% plus in terms of output, it wasn't sufficient. Where were the other power stations? Well, something like 180 of them were zipped up. They were offline. They just decided, hey, we're not going to compete. We're not going to provide right now for whatever reasons. And there's no penalty for that. It's a free market, don't you know? And so the cascading effects, for example, not sufficient energy meant that then there wasn't electricity going to the natural gas plants that needed it to run their natural gas plants, and electricity that was required to move natural gas in the pipelines to the natural gas plants, and so on. And so again, I use the word cascading effects. That's an example. But this was the result of so-called deregulation, you know, which is where it's the magic of the marketplace. Oh, we don't have to do anything. We leave it to the marketplace. It'll make all the decisions for us. And as Lyndon LaRouche often said, the invisible hand is the hand that picks your pocket. And that's what's happened with disastrous consequences. And you can look at Energy and Vistra. I mean, those two companies alone now account for 70% of the energy provided to the grid. You know, utter failure as a result of the lack of regulation. So as Ben emphasized, as Keisha emphasized, we have to direct the economy forward. We have to provide direction. The governor of Texas is saying for the first time, we got to build power plants. You know, what a radical idea. We got to build sufficient power and ensure it's there and online. So let me leave my remarks for opening there. I hope that's a useful introduction. I thank Ben and Keisha for theirs.